Hello and welcome to In It, a podcast for families with kids who learn and think differently.
Here you'll find advice, camaraderie, stories of successes, and yes, sometimes failures from experts and from parents and caregivers like you.
I'm Gretchen Vierstra, a former classroom teacher and an editor here at understood.org.
And I'm Rachel Bozek, a writer, editor, and mom who has definitely been in it. Today we're talking about why we need to stop saying sorry.
Now, we're not talking about real, meaningful apologies. We know those are important, but what about all those times we say sorry for things that aren't actually our fault? Like when our child needs some extra time to complete a task.
And what about the times other people tell us they're sorry things are the way they are, even though we know those people actually have the power to change the way things are?
Our guest today is someone who has given all of this a lot of thought. In fact, she's written a book about it.
Dr. Christina Cipriano, most people just call her Dr. Chris, is a psychologist and an associate professor at the Yale University Child Study Center.
Her new book is called Be Unapologetically Impatient. And even though it doesn't come out till this summer, we had the pleasure of previewing a few chapters, and it's so good.
It is so good. Dr. Chris writes as an expert on psychology, but also as a parent to a daughter who has ADHD and sensory challenges and a son with a rare regressive disease.
We're so happy she's joining us today. Hello, Dr. Chris. Welcome to In It.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so thrilled to be talking with you today. And what we want to talk about is the problem with the words "I'm sorry" and why we should all stop saying it when it comes to advocating for kids who are different in some way. You say you had a change in perspective on this phrase almost from the first moment you became a mom. What was going on for you back then that led you to rethink this phrase?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share about this. And so, for me, when I started to hear "I'm sorry" being said to me in the context of my children and their needs, it lit a light bulb for me that, typically we would think about someone being, apologetic as an opportunity to express sympathy, or that they're trying to be kind and, maybe moving in the direction of seeking to connect with us. Although sympathy really, what it does is kind of can help to make the person who says the "I'm sorry" feel better and kind of leaves you, or it leaves me in this case, like kind of at a loss. And so I have 4 beautiful children. They are wildly diverse. My oldest has a rare disease. My middle daughter is neurodivergent. And the "I'm sorry" started coming out in respect to kind of their needs and the ways in which they weren't getting access to services or treatments or opportunities. And so for me, when I started to hear it and the light bulb went off, I was thinking to myself, well, why are you saying you're sorry for us? Like, are you positioning us as kind of less than? Like, is it there's some sort of hierarchy here in what you're saying? Or, is the expectation that I should be sorry for my kids' needs? Because let's be real, we don't need to give anybody any reason to look at our families and our children as less than anyone else's on the basis of any needs, right? We have our right to be fully showing up and have the opportunity to access and benefit from our world. And so it was kind of this combination of things over really the first decade of my parenting that brought me to this realization that, people say that they're sorry to me all the time for things that they can change. Why is there seemingly an expectation that I would somehow be apologetic about things that I can't, about the needs and the rights, the interests of my children?
Can you give an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So my oldest has a rare disease. It's called Phelan-McDermott syndrome. It's a regressive syndrome. As he ages, he loses skills. And he now relies on a wheelchair for full mobility services. And the amount of times, and I talk about just a few of them in the book, but I could have probably written a whole book about the wheelchair, and I'm sorry, to be quite honest with you, that people in our kind of broader spaces, so whether it's like the airline or at the amusement park or at the industrial office or the government building, the baseball game, who would say things to us like, "Oh, I'm sorry," or "I'm sorry for your inconvenience," or "I'm sorry," and it has something to do with the wheelchair, like, his wheelchair doesn't arrive after we're like trying to get off a plane and we're stuck on the jet bridge for 45 minutes because the wheelchair got brought to luggage pickup as opposed to coming to us at gate check. And, all the TS agents are saying they're sorry to us and the administrators, as though like we have any other option than to just wait there for the wheelchair.
Right.
Like the necessity of it is just lost. And, maybe just another example to kind of enrich this. There is also a lot of I'm sorry that comes up around like the idea that my children have, diverse diagnoses, like a sorry for. Like people will say like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, or I'm sorry for them. And yeah, even just saying these things out loud, they like make my blood boil. And it really kind of signals to us like a bit of a devaluation of them as people who derive great joy in the world and have so many assets and strengths that they bring to everything that we engage in.
So there's another example you give about a visit to an amusement park.
Oh.
Where you looked on the website beforehand and it says that all these different rides are accessible to wheelchairs. But then when you get there, the people running the ride say, oh, sorry, that wheelchair doesn't work on this ride. That is just infuriating.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, yes. And in that particular example, I was speaking about the policy that used to exist at Universal Studios. And so I say it used to exist because they actually changed the policy after I went through a series of interactions thereafter, our very kind of unfortunate situation where we were being denied access for our son to go on the quote unquote accessible rides as a result of the policy being structured to not account for pediatric wheelchairs. So it was designed as though like they had a set of questions that they had to ask. The attendant at every ride would say, is his seatbelt for comfort or safety? And it's a pediatric wheelchair, so they like newsflash, they're all for safety, right? Just like you have all the rules around being in cars, et cetera, with seatbelts and children. And so that in and of itself was supposed to mean then therefore he couldn't go on the ride. And so I was like, this is something that we can address this. Like
because
we can
he actually needs the seatbelt.
Absolutely, as does every other child in a pediatric wheelchair who's not just like, being wheeled around because they twisted their ankle that day.
So you talk about the phrase "I'm sorry" as a kind of deficit framing. That's the term that you use. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. So it's basically when we think about someone in a deficit frame, we're devaluing that person or treating them as less than. And so we will talk about the things that someone or a group of people can't do. Or make assumptions about things that they can't do or maybe would not be interested in doing. And so it is a devaluing of the whole person. And in many places and spaces, it can come off really like demoralizing and dehumanizing of the individual. And so like, I'll give you an example. My oldest, Miles, with his rare disease, he derives incredible joy from the Toy Story franchise. And, people will like see us out and about and he'll have like his tablet and his Toy Story things, et cetera. And, sometimes people will say things like, oh, like, does he watch anything else? Or why don't you change it up? Like if they're by my house, like it's on for like the millionth time. And I'll explain that, like he gets great joy from this. It's his brain. It's different than all of our brains are different. And for him, he derives great joy. And they'll say like, oh, like, I'm so sorry that he like can't or won't or whatever, fill in the blank, will continue on as though it's like a bad thing. Whereas meanwhile, I'm just clinging on that, wow, he gets such great joy from these experiences and from, Buzz Lightyear is his spirit animal. And like, we're all in it with him. So I'm not sorry about that at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to pick up something else about this deficit framing that I want to make sure we're making clear. Your readers, a lot of them actually have very, challenging things going on in their lives. So it's not that you're saying like everything's peaches and cream 100% all the time, right? That is not your point.
No, absolutely. I mean, I write from the lens of disability and our experiences with disability, but there are many different kind of ways and spaces and places where we maybe consider ourselves or someone may consider us disadvantaged. And I introduced this idea that disadvantage actually provides you with this different vantage point. And so, yeah, these disadvantages, they can and they do, as I say in the book, likely suck, right? They're not great things. I mean, when we think about kind of the ways in which poverty intersects and kind of interrupts our opportunities to advance in society, from the ways in which, having certain minoritized identities in different spaces and places worldwide can put you at a disadvantage, and that can experience like tremendous challenges in livelihoods to access and benefit from school, have the opportunities for gainful employment. I'm not saying that none of that is true.
Right.
But on the contrary, introducing the idea that, well, you have this perspective, like we can use it to affect change, because the reality is it can take our lifetime to change how a system sees you. But each and every one of us can shift how we see ourselves in the system right now. And that's kind of the steps that I'm moving through in the book of how to harness that vantage point that, in many spaces and places is positioning you at a disadvantage, as actually you have insights to share with the world right now to affect change. And here are some evidence-based strategies for how to engage other people and letting them in, inviting them in to your vantage point so they can see the world the way you see the world, and we can build a world that's better for everybody through that and through those interactions.
I love that. That's so great. One situation I can imagine is that someone finds themselves talking to a parent who reveals that their child has some kind of disability or learning or thinking difference. I think many people may have the initial reaction of saying, "I'm sorry." What else might someone say in that situation?
Yeah, I appreciate that question so much. So, you can start with gratitude, thanking someone for letting you in, for sharing this information with you and providing you kind of a glimmer of insight. And then move from that gratitude into asking a question that's non-judgmental of like, would you like to tell me more about whatever that might be? Or, we can move into even a more kind of empathetic or compassionate response. How can I support you and your family? Now learning this information. And I'll tell you, for someone who, we have a beautifully diverse family, and we've had beautifully diverse reactions to our family. But the most close to my heart moments are the moments when strangers or, the parent on the soccer field or someone in the, at the supermarket in the parking lot will ask, like, how can I help? Like, how can I support you? What would be useful? And they're really kind of offering, and to me, that's moving beyond, right, that, and not just to me, but to science as well. It's moving beyond that kind of sympathetic top-level response to this more kind of compassionate interaction of, we can do something together, or I can do something to support you in many ways. I know I use a few examples throughout the book that kind of get at some of these pieces, and from the kind of initial like tongue in cheek of people responding to me when they would see me out with my littles, my three youngest are all 15 months apart. And so I talk a bit this beginning in the book that they kind of looked like, twins and then triplets, but who were all different than each other. And people were very quick to say things like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, you have your hands full." And like, I knew they were just trying to form connection, but really, like, I didn't need a reminder that I was not an octopus. Like, that was not a helpful thing. It was not saying, like, well, let me hold the door for you.
Right.
Or could I,
yeah.
could I do something? Anyway, that's a very superficial example, but like, they get much deeper as we kind of move through those experiences. And, the last week I was at Children's Hospital with my son, Miles, and we were, talking to a service provider, and they couldn't really figure out what was going on with his G-tube. And, there are many children and adults who have G-tubes across the country. And, one of the nurses who was evaluating with the doctor said something about, well, maybe he's having an allergy to it because they had a new one placed. And she said, "I've never seen that before, but I mean, it could happen. Like it's presenting like an allergy. You should call the provider of who makes the G-tubes and find out if they changed the material that they use to make them." And I laughed and I said, Well, I could try. It'll probably take me 6 months to
Right.
get someone on the phone. I don't know how I would ever get access to that. But I imagine if you tried to call as the provider and said on behalf of all of your patients,
Right.
rather than it just being, just me, Miles' mom, making a phone call and I'm no one to them, maybe you can answer. And the doctor and the nurse and my husband was also in the room. They all like stopped, and I saw my husband like trying to not laugh because he's very familiar with my book and knows that I'm
Right.
calling people in the book of saying like it's not just my job to deal with things that I are addressing. It's everyone's. We need to do this together. And then they said, okay, we'll look into this. We will follow up. She understood my perspective.
And like you said, they're representing a whole bunch of folks who are going to need answers to this question. So why put that on you?
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about how yucky it can feel to hear "I'm sorry" from someone else, especially when we're talking about our families. So now let's pivot to when we want to advocate for our families, for our kids. Can you give us a few quick examples of when parents and caregivers say "I'm sorry" when they're advocating? Because I'm not sure we're all realizing how often we might do it.
Absolutely. We are in many ways have been socialized to apologize for asking questions when questions are a form of how we learn, right? They're how we engage. And so if you, are becoming a parent of a child who has a diagnosis or is in need of additional supports or services at school, it's a whole new world. And so we would expect that you would have lots of questions, right? Even those who have training in special education, lots of questions of what's needed. And so when engaging with the school system or the medical support systems, it's very common to hear parents and caregivers saying things like, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" Or "I'm sorry, what do you mean by?" Or "I'm sorry," and then asking questions regarding the child servicing as like the first step of even just understand what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the second layer of it, of apologizing for asking for services that your children are entitled to by law to meet their needs and to understand and embrace their diverse ways of knowing and seeing and navigating their world, as though we have been socialized to anticipate that that is something we shouldn't or couldn't ask
Right.
for. And so this as though we're apologizing, and we see this with families and caregivers, that we're apologizing for the doctor's time, we're apologizing for the teacher's time, for the speech therapist's time, for the OT's time. But on the flip side of that, right, like it's not something to be sorry for. Like that dismisses our child or our family's needs and values. Our kids and our families and our needs are not something to be positioned as less than. They are not something to be sorry for.
And I think after us talking about your book and this conversation we were going to have, and I just realized how often in my day I say "I'm sorry."
So many times a day.
So many times. And I think part of it is too, and this also probably comes from this deficit framing just in terms of when we're talking about advocating for your kids' needs, is like, I think I'm not going to get what I need if I don't apologize first.
Right. I was just thinking about that in terms of, I've been lucky enough to not have had this experience, but I've heard so many people talk about it where whoever is there to help them through their situation, it's like they're doing them a favor.
Right.
Right. And that's positioning us as though we're somehow like a burden, or we're extra, or we're unnecessary, or, fill in the blank with the ways in which it's positioned. And, it's really common for that "I'm sorry" to come up when there is a hierarchy. And there's a lot of natural hierarchies in these systems and structures that we're engaging in as parents of children with disabilities. So it's the family or caregiver. I hate the idea of the positioning of verses, but it's the parent or caregiver, and then there's the school system. There's the educator. But even at the micro level, there's the teacher and the student, right? There's a hierarchy there. There's the patient and the doctor, or the provider, the patient and the medical billing insurer, right? The folks that we would imagine all of them would always have the answers to our questions and have the expertise and training to support us and our children and families to thrive. And yet, many of us have been socialized to kind of keep leading with that "I'm sorry" as though, we're taking up space with our needs.
So What are some alternatives in this context to leading with I'm sorry when we're asking for someone to do something differently for us or for our kids, from an advocacy standpoint?
Absolutely. So lead with gratitude. I can't say that enough. Always start with the thank you. I also talk about in the book making yourself known, like positioning yourself. So I will introduce myself in every situation, like this is Miles, or like I am Miles' mother, or we're not from around here. I will give them some context, because in the absence of contextualizing who you are in the interaction, whether it be with a stranger or a new care provider or a teacher, you are a parent or you're that parent. And it's no fault of that person on the other side of things, right? It's just that as adults, our brain, it tricks us. We become more inward leaning. And so, care providers, medical professionals, education professionals, they fall into the way they do things and what they see, just like we all do in our jobs, because our brain habituates the information. And so humanize the experience so that we can help to bring people so they can see you as you are, not as how they imagine you might be in that context.
So is this unapologetic approach to self-advocacy something you've taught your kids or that you work on with them?
Absolutely. And especially when it comes to my neurodivergent daughter, Eleanor, teaching her to ask for support and to ask questions when she doesn't understand in ways that are opening up lines of conversations and not kind of calling out. So in the book, I kind of walk through a series of steps of how, we may unintentionally or intentionally in some spaces call people out or put people on the defense when we're seeking or asking for support. We're in the face of an injustice. And, when you do that, nobody hears you. And so when we advocate for ourselves and our needs, we want to use a tone, and I give her sentence starters to invite people in about why you need it, because that anger and frustration, it is so rightfully there, right? I'm not saying to not feel it. We feel it and then we harness it. We harness the power of that emotion to help to advance us and everybody around us. I think one really clear example of this. So earlier in the episode, we were talking about the amusement park. As we were going through it, now Eleanor was younger then when this happened, and she was by the second day of all the ride providers telling us that Miles couldn't ride the ride, she was just calling them ableist. She was just saying you're ableist, how dare you? And all of her fiery energy. And of course, we're kind of laughing as we're saying this, but that I explained to her, no one is going to listen to you when you do that. That is not going to help us. And I get the frustration. And of course, where did she get that from? She got that from me. She saw me, I had my moment of vulnerability and broke into tears with one of the people on day one. And then, and I modeled it. And so she did it after that. And we kind of, walk through that later. And so now when we're places and spaces and there isn't a ramp, and because this is a constant part of our existence, the navigation around with the wheelchair and stuff, she will still be frustrated, but she will use kinder words with other people around us of asking for their help to move the chair so that her brother's wheelchair could go through, as opposed to being why don't you move the chair?
And I'm thinking of in a classroom experience, for example, if you're middle schooler, one of their accommodations is to get notes or an outline from the teacher, and the teacher forgot to give the notes, and you're trying to tell your child, well, you ask the teacher, say that, please, can I have my notes? I imagine there where you're trying to say, you don't say, I'm sorry, I need notes, right?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Start with thank you, and then state as a fact what it was that you needed.
Yes.
Right? It's not an open for debate, right? It leaves open to interpretation this idea that maybe I shouldn't be asking for this, when that is not the case, right? So yeah, absolutely.
And I think we all just need to probably too understand that this is hard to change, and we're human, and we're not going to be perfect at it, and habits are so hard to break, right?
Absolutely.
There's scientific evidence behind that, right?
Yeah.
There is. And, and there's also scientific evidence around this idea that when you have accommodated so much new information. So this is a psychological term here. When you have from cognitive psychology, when you've accommodated so much information that you change the way you see things and you change the way you know things. That is these new glasses. That is that new way of seeing things. And so, in the book, I talk about it as whether it's, the glitter on your heart, like that persistent glitter that never goes away. Like if any of you have children who play with glitter, it shows up year after year. It's always there. It never
always there.
But once it's there, right? And this is from a neuroplasticity standpoint in your brain. Like once you've made that change, like it's always there, and so you're always going to see it. And so as we work as human beings across the lifespan to focus our attention and our intention to attend. So intention and attention. So our intention to attend, because again, remember, our brain can trick us as we age. Like it gets into these patterns, and then you stop seeing things and people as they are. You just see them as like just the way it is and the way we do things, right? And so we can continue to evolve and grow and use that new vantage point, but it takes work. And it's something that I work at every day, and everyone around me does as well. And we hold my support system, we hold ourselves and each other accountable to doing that good work in ways that will support our kids and all kids to thrive. But it's not easy. This is not an easy Band-Aid of advice.
I mean, this was also helpful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for writing such a beautiful book.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Keep an eye out for Dr. Chris's new book, Be Unapologetically Impatient.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you have any thoughts about the episode, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at init@understood.org.
And check out the show notes for this episode, where we have more resources and links to anything we mentioned.
This show is brought to you by understood.org. Understood is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering people with learning and thinking differences like ADHD and dyslexia. If you'd like to help us continue this work, donate at understood.org/give.
In It is produced and edited by Julie Subrin, with additional production support from Cody Nelson and Samaya Adams. Justin D. Wright mixes the show, and Mike Errico wrote our theme music. Brianna Berry is our production director. Neil Drumming is our editorial director.
From understood.org, our executive directors are Laura Key, Scott Coshier, and Seth Melnick. Thanks for listening.